one. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that can speak to a lot of diverse topics. And today I'm excited to have Wendell Jordan back. For some of y'all that may have listened, we got a previous episode. He is 10 years in sales and marketing profession. He's currently the owner of Jordan Marketing Consultants, a digital agency focused on high ROI solutions, and a SEO consultant and web design professional. He helps local businesses get more sales, retain more customers, build brand awareness, and pretty hyper focused on local SEO. So Wendell, welcome back. But yeah, just a little background. So we talked a lot about the local SEO and about what Wendell does in his day job. But, you know, as we talked pre-show, I found out that Wendell started his sales career knocking on doors in New York City. And it just floored me because I know how some of us, you know, can have call reluctance from time to time. And I just was like so surprised. Anyway, so Wendell was gracious enough with his time to come back with us. And we're just going to have a little fun episode talking about some things that he's seen and gone through. Wendell, thanks for taking time out of your day. We certainly do appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, sir. Being a door-to-door sales rep in New York is definitely not for the faint of hearts.
Right. You know, I see people, you know, in the past, I've seen people that work the phones that, you know, I think I related this in our last episode. We had this was back a long time ago. We had a call tracker. It would just look at phone numbers and it would count how many dials everybody made every day. And so we had a guy that he was so sheepish that, you know, he was not making any sales. He was struggling. So I pulled his call log and I started looking at the phone numbers. He was calling the 7-Eleven. He was calling the time and temperature at the local bank, called his mother, grandmother. You know, he's calling anybody who was friendly, but he's not making any actual cold calls. And he's so reluctant on a telephone. And so, you know, in my mind, I extrapolate this to, okay, so how would you feel knocking on somebody's door in New York City? You know, not to, as I told you before, not to be too stereotypical, but they can be fairly abrasive just in the course of a general business, much less you standing there knocking on their door trying to sell them something. Tell us a little bit about that.
So two things that come to mind. So the first thing about the sheepish gentleman that you just spoke of. So first, let me go back. When I started, as I was telling you pre-taping, when I started in door-to-door sales, I didn't have any background really, right? Like I was in music for some time and I reached out to different record labels and would make phone calls and stuff, but it was trivial at best, right? So I didn't really have a scope on what was or was not sales. So my greenness, you know, I was so green, I didn't know how bad it could be.
Right.
But to speak to the sheepishness of a fellow salesperson, I remember when I started, we had to take a test because we had to know the product. So it was probably like a 6 to 8 part test, right? Like 6 or 8 modules. And the thing in the office was, as long as the manager was there, you could get help, as much help as you needed to make sure you passed so they could hurry up and get you out to the field. Right. So they didn't really care about the test. It was more the vendor that wanted you to pass the test.
Yeah, right.
So the this one gentleman, the supervisor helped me probably 80% of the test. So he pulls me to the side and he goes, "Hey, you're not taking this seriously. I've been here for 5 weeks and I haven't had a sale. Okay. You come in here, you're playing around." I'm very jovial and playful all the time. Like I've been this way since forever. So he's like, "You're playing around all the time and this just isn't going to work out for you." So I'm like, now I'm competitive. I'm competitive more than I am anything else. I'm competitive about all kinds of trivial things. I'll try to finish my cup of water before you if need be, right? So I say to him, I'm like, well, so I say, "Okay, thank you, I appreciate it." And then going about the day. I was shadowing at the time. I shadowed the gentleman. I came back. I'm still playing in the office. And he pulls me to the side again. And he goes, "Listen, I'm telling you, I've been here 5 weeks. I haven't had a single sale." I later find out, speaking of sheepishness, he was only knocking maybe 10 doors a day, which is the equivalent of, you know, calling 1 or 2 people a day, right? 10 doors a day is, you should be doing that every few minutes. It really, that's nominal. So he is browbeating me too. I mean, he is, you need to learn the research of the software. I mean, of the technology we sell. I mean, he is just browbeating me. So I go, well, how about this? I think there was an 8-week window. If you didn't make a sale, they would take you, they would remove you from payroll, as I've heard it called, right? Because we were commission only. So it didn't make any sense for them to keep paying for your system if you weren't making sales.
Right.
So it was about two weeks, I think, at this point away from it. So I think he was about 6 weeks in. So I told him, I said, I'll get my first sale before you, right? And at this point, I'm only maybe 4 days into this job. So, and as I started to say earlier, I still remember this first sale to this day. I was supposed to shadow for 3 days. They only let me shadow 1. They told me I was good enough and to go get one, right? So I go out and I knock this area in Jamaica, Queens. If anyone's familiar with Jamaica, Queens, it's over by the Armory, right over on Parsons and Jamaica Avenue. I remember it vividly because I know the area, but I've never walked it.
Yeah.
So I'm walking, I'm knocking, I'm walking, nobody's answering, slamming the door, yelling through the door, nothing. I finally get this house. It's a little corner house, and this guy's sitting outside. I start talking to him. 3 hours later, so I took every bit of anything I knew about this product out.
Yeah.
3 hours later, he goes, this all sounds really good, but I'm not the decision maker. Hold on. Goes in the house, goes and gets his sister. So now I got to start all over again. Right. And I called my manager because he took a little while. So I called my manager. I said, hey, I think I got a sale. Can you help me? He's like, well, how long have you been talking to the guy? I'm like, well, it was a little. I look at the time, I'm like, well, it's about 3 hours. Like, Jesus Christ, why are you talking so long? I don't know, but I think he wants to buy. He's like, well, just close it. And he says, don't take that long to talk to this next person. So I figure out how to shorten it a little bit. It only takes me an hour. So now I'm 4 hours into my first sale. And finally they sign up. The next day I come into the office with my paperwork. I go straight to this guy and I go, do you have your first? And I don't say this pridefully, but I think he quit that next day because he had been there for almost 2 months and never had a sale. But again, he was only knocking 10 doors a day. Yeah. So like, again, to circle all the way back around, they used to tell us a good day was anywhere between 60 and 80 doors a day.
Wow.
Right. Now you look at, and again, you are a Texan, right? Like I'm a transplant here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and nonetheless, depending on what community you're knocking in New York, like the response is different. Yeah. So my first day, I only knocked maybe 20 doors because I spent 4 hours at one door, right? So that clearly that was not a high return day, right? Like it spent most of the day talking to one client, or one customer. But the toughest part of it was being able to get in and out of the gates because gated front yards is a thing in New York. I didn't know that wasn't common practice in all of America until I left. Like in Texas, most places I've been in Texas, and it may be different further north, but nobody has a fence, right? You may have the fencing to your backyard, but not to get to the front door. It's usually pretty open. It's an open landscape. So knocking, going in and out of doors, not being sure, in and out of gates, not being sure who has dogs and who doesn't, right? Because this is more of an urban dwelling. So, some people, they have signs, some people don't. Man, I mean, again, 60 to 80 doors a day. 60 to 80 doors a day was the low. And if you were in an apartment building, the expectation was somewhere around like 120.
Wow. Yeah. And, our expectation for cold calls that we had back in that day was 100. I mean, it was an easy number. If you were really hitting it, you could do 200 very easily. So, I mean, I can't even imagine trying to get to 100 doors, 100 doors in a day. But, that being face-to-face, that it's funny when you think about you being on the phone and how upset and worried people get about the rejection on the phone. It's like, well, all you got to do is hang up. They can't see you. But when you're in person, I mean, man, you are right there. And then also, I think when you get questioned, when you're on the phone, you always have that like, hey, I can put you on hold a minute and I can find this answer. But man, when you're standing door to, face to face, you got to have an answer.
So, and most of my responses will be stories, because I have stories for days. My old manager, and I will be sure to send him this specific podcast because he will find it hilarious. He used to say, "If you need anything, call me." That was his phrase. When we left the office, he go, "If you need anything, call me." He never answered the phone. Never answered the phone. Calling him was a moot point. We almost never answered the phone. And then when he did answer, his answer was always yes. It didn't matter what it was, whether it was truly possible, his answer was always yes. He would yes you to a sale, no matter how many yeses it took. So we would go door to door, and we used to have what they used to call a slick. That's what the manager used to call it, like a one sheet, and they would laminate it for us. Yeah, right. So they would laminate it for us, and that's what they used to. My manager used to. One of the other managers called it a slick. So we used to have this slick, and at the time it was cable, so it had the good, better, best package on there. And then on the flip side, it explained to you, because we were selling fiber. We were selling fiber optics, so it would show you the difference in the nodes, right? Like anyone cares or knows what a node is. So we would then. That was all we had. And every now and again, they would give us 2 to 5 channel guides. And the intention was for you to never give a channel guide away.
Yeah.
Right? That was really the intention of having a channel guide, was to hopefully put something in the prospect's hand fast enough so that they didn't close the door in your face.
Yeah.
That was really the intention. Same thing with the slick. It was really the intention was for them to hold on to something so that you could force them to listen to you. So that I think in the very beginning, and I was fortunate because I'm a talker, right? So I didn't really have trouble with the talking part. It was the selling part that I had to grow into. But in the beginning, the toughest part was being able to have the conversation and be versed enough to be able to answer the questions on the fly. And then hopefully you get the same questions enough to where you can remember your answers. Right? Like to this day, I talk to people from all different nationalities, and I can talk about Indian TV still, because I sold a lot of Indian TV packages. So like Set TV and Sony TV and all those other things. To this day, I kind of have some understanding of, right? Like there's a couple of Polish television networks that are very common for people who are, maybe first generation or, migrated here. They need their Polish TV, but there's only 2 channels at that time that most cable providers offered. So again, things that you kind of get to know on the fly. But I tell you, in the 8 modules, there was never a section on international TV. So like there were so many things that we weren't even equipped with that in the very beginning of my sales for that specific company, I had no idea what the answers were, right? So like oftentimes I would say, and this is when I didn't know, I'd be like, actually, I'm not too sure. I'm gonna have to get with my manager on that. I'm not sure. But like you said, it's door to door. So I only have a very small window before these people want to go back to their lives, right? Like they can't carry me around the house like a phone, a house phone, or a cell phone, and me be able to talk to them while they're doing all these other things. They have to stop everything they're doing to come talk to this stranger at the door who claims he's gonna get them a better deal on cable. It was interesting.
Yeah, and then I would only assume that if you make a sale, you actually have some paperwork you have to fill out. So then it's like them letting you in the house, or either them coming out on the front stoop or in the hallway to fill that out. I mean, how difficult was that?
So, and we talked about this off air last time. We legally weren't supposed to go into the house. So for liability reasons, right? Because if you trip and fall, then whose insurance pays for your broken leg, right? So we technically weren't supposed to. Oftentimes people would invite you in, and to not be rude, very tongue in cheek, our manager would say, if people invite you in, you're okay, right? But try not to invite yourself into people's homes.
Right.
I actually think it was somewhere like in Texas, or maybe it was Missouri, but there was a door-to-door cable person that got in trouble because something happened in the house and there was some allegations, but it all stemmed from them being a door-to-door person that wasn't supposed to be inside. But either way, so the tough part about it was when we used to have a little clipboard, That was the other piece. It was a clipboard. So in a perfect world, and again, like I'm a pretty big guy, so like I can hold my clipboard on my arm, really, right? So I can do everything I need in front of me. But if you're a smaller stature, your arms are shorter, it poses a totally different set of issues. The toughest part of closing the sale was the paperwork, because it was a sheet of paper, probably 14 inches long, give or take. So it was a little bit longer than a standard sheet of paper. And at some point in there, you had to sign, we had to check a box that said month to month or contract. And there would be times where people would be excited, elated. You're supposed to fill out the paperwork first and then put it into the system. Oftentimes you put it into the system first because the system is way more important than the paperwork. And then they get to the paperwork and they don't want to sign it because it's just a piece of paper. They sign it and then you can change it to a contract as far as they're concerned.
Right.
And then internally in the system, which afforded me the ability later on to be able to sell to B2B relatively easily. But I used to have to ask for the social security numbers.
Wow.
Right, at the door.
Oh, wow.
Complete total stranger. And we used to have to do identity verification at the door.
I mean, this guy just wandered up to my door and now I'm like giving him my social security number.
Right, guess what? I'm going to save you some money on cable. But first, I need your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and your date of birth. Okay? Yeah. I promise this is completely legit. Right? Like that was our struggle. That was our struggle. But again, when I think back on it, that was the thing that helped me to be able to do this from a cold calling perspective. And I was actually having this conversation last week, as I was telling you, as I was grueling it in Miami, right? Talking to a gentleman who was talking about in the finance sector. He was talking about the managers, the asset managers having to come face to face. And what I've always told people is most of my clients never see me in person. So, but because I could get a stranger to give me the social security number, I knew I could talk to anyone in the country and get a debit card or a credit card, because that's way easier.
Right.
I mean, total and complete stranger. I had a very high first time contact close rate. So more often than not, probably, and it may sound a bit like I'm tooting my own horn, and I kind of am, but I had like a 70% first time contact rate. Wow. So like it wasn't, it's one of the few things I brag about, but I was an amazing door-to-door salesman, mainly because I talk a lot and I'm silly, right? Like I play a lot, so it disarms people.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't like I had to come back 2 or 3 times in order to get these people to give up this information, and granted, we did have a national company that we were associated with, right? Or international company, if you will, but our badges didn't say their name, right? Like our badges said the vendor that they contracted, which again made it even more sketch, because we would get to this certain point and I would have to give them this almost what would be considered a Chromebook, because I don't think they sell netbooks anymore, but it was like a little laptop. I had to hand it over to the customer, and you'd be surprised how many times, it was like, well, I don't know. And then I'd actually type in my social security number and then show them that it only showed up as those little asterisks.
Yeah.
Right. And then sometimes what would happen is people would say, okay, would sing a song and dance about how great their credit was, because it was a credit check. And we let them know that. And then they would come back with a $500 deposit. But oftentimes it would be because they didn't put a real social in. Right. So anytime we had a deposit, like probably 60, 30, probably not that much, probably 30 to 40% of the time, it was because they weren't putting real information in, because they weren't sure what was going to happen.
Right.
Oh, and then even to speak even further to that, I left that company and went to a different one a little bit later on in my door-to-door career. And they actually only required their identification verification process was a lot simpler. So you could actually use the driver's license ID. So that made life way simpler. And needless to say, if the barrier of entry is a driver's license ID, we can do that, with relative ease.
Yeah.
So, but I remember the first time, not that first sale, but I remember the first time, because they were very, very amenable. That those very first people that allowed me to get my first sale. They didn't know it was my first sale. They were very amenable. They actually gave me a very skewed view on life, because when I got the first one, my first day out by myself, I thought that my life was going to be grandiose, right? Like I thought every day would be a sale, because if you got one the first day, you would get one every day, right?
Right.
And it was easy. It wasn't, again, I talked more than I needed to. I probably could have gave a total of an hour and gotten the sale, you know, but other than those people, I mean, I remember the next few, it was hard because even if I got to the point where we started talking about price, and then I'd have to pull out the netbook. And then once I get to the part where I got to give up the social, now I'm, and it's also in your confidence in being able to say, and I'm going to need your date of birth and social right now, right? Like I got to be able to say it, not like, oh, I know this sounds sketchy, but you have to say it like, this is what everyone does. It's normal, you know?
Yeah. So you actually had, there's like multiple hurdles getting somebody just to answer the door. That was probably the
easy part.
one.
That was the easy part. The easy part was answering the door. Everything else after it was the stress. I mean, man, oh man, I remember I was in Rockaway Beach, which used to be like a resort city in New York. So Rockaway Beach, there's a lot of bungalow houses that are still there. People live in them now. But Rockaway Beach, I'm knocking in this one complex, and sometimes they would give us territory that they only wanted us to work for a very short period. Most territory, they expected you to work about 3 to 5 weeks. And then sometimes they give you, especially a building, it would only be maybe a weekend deal. So it would be a Friday through Sunday thing, because in New York, which I also learned in talking to other people in door to door, in New York, depending on what complex you were in, what kind of apartment complex it was, sometimes in the leasing, it would say that they would not allow soliciting. So they would have to talk to the people in the complex and decide this specific weekend, we're allowing solicitors to come in.
Okay.
So that said, we were working this building on a Friday night. That next Saturday, apparently we knocked on some board members or whatever's doors the night before, and they weren't happy. They didn't answer, but they weren't happy. So that morning, I don't know how they did it so fast. I mean, we never stopped. We always stopped knocking at 8 o'clock. So I think legally you can't knock after 9, just like you can't call after 9. And then we would start, especially on a Saturday, at about 10, 11 o'clock. And by the time we got to the building, there was already somebody downstairs to let us know that we were not allowed back in the building again.
Oh my God.
The entire weekend of territory was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So and that made me think about the time, like during the week, did you mostly knock in the evenings? Because, if people were at work, I'm sure, unless you were in an older part of town, it'd be hard to find enough people at home.
Right. So it just depends on the community. So, and again, this is one of these things where I love selling. I mean, I love it. I love it a lot. I think it's because of the conversational piece.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough, and I'm going to answer your question, but I was fortunate enough to help someone last weekend with something with a sales piece, right? And like the amount of endorphins that get pumping in me as I'm selling, because I had to do a little bit of selling. I had to do some rapport building with the people, and I'm talking to them. And when I was done, I was like, oh man, I missed that, because I don't get to do that anymore. But in a face-to-face situation, but what we used to do, or let me rephrase, what I used to do was I only knocked between the hours of 5 and 8:30, because 9 o'clock, legally, 8:59 is the last time you can knock on a door. Yeah. After that, I don't know what laws you break, but you're not allowed to solicit after a certain hour.
Right.
So I would usually do between 5 and 6 and about 8:50, right? And depending on the community, like it was a point where one summer I had a community where there was usually one of the 2 people in this household would be home. So I had a partner at the time, and my partner and I were going to this community at 11 o'clock, and by 1 o'clock, because it was a really high contact rate. And by 1, 2 o'clock, we would already have the sales that we needed for the day. It was only maybe like a 3 or 4 hour thing. And every now and again, we would go back out and try to catch the houses that we didn't. Yeah. The other thing too, that was key for us, or key for the way that this company set up success for their door-to-door reps, was we had something called a door tag. So if you think about like the FedEx or the UPS tags that they leave.
Oh yeah.
Just in here. So ours would say, the major company's name, and we would handwrite our name and phone number in it. So that in itself created its own level of difficulty. Sometimes people would call and think that it was still a scam, right? So They would ask a million questions. I had one person actually Googled my name and Googled my phone number, but because I spent a lot of time in those music years spamming the internet, because spamming the internet was not a thing at that time, right? Like that was like common practice, right? Spam was normal. So when you Google my name at that time, you would get these message board posts about this artist that we were promoting. Because I would usually use my name as the, as the author.
Right.
So, and then there was a recording studio that I used to own. So like this person Googled my name and they called me. And I mean, it was the most mysterious phone call ever. They were like, "Hello, is this Wendell Jordan?" And I'm like, "Yeah, hey, what's up? How you doing?" "Yeah, you left your name and number." And I mean, they were so mysterious about the way that they called. I think they called private, and they go, "Are you from Verizon?" "Oh, I wasn't supposed to say the name, but are you from that company?" "Yes." "Okay. Well, I Googled you and it says here that you have a recording studio in Whitestone." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, if you Google the phone number, it's my phone number. Like, I didn't pretend like it was Verizon's, right?" Like,
right, exactly.
but, like, we didn't get that far in the conversation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I loved it because I enjoyed that part. I enjoyed never really knowing what was going to happen tomorrow, right? Like every day we had a new story. I mean, man.
So did people get not necessarily violent, but maybe, come to the door with a gun behind the door or a knife or some kind of a, weapon, thinking that they're going to have to fend you off?
Well, Roy, what I'll say is, and I always make this joke, and hopefully as I continue to be fortunate enough to have people like you give me a platform, I'm a pretty big guy, right? So if there were violence, it would probably have to be a weapon, but no one has ever opened the door with the intention of beating me up, right? Yeah. Like I look more like a linebacker than anything else. So the thought of opening your door and just beating me up off your step is really not a thought. But what I have had happen, I wasn't sure if I was going to tell the story, but since we talk about like that kind of extremism, I knocked these doors in this one community. And I mean, the community as a whole was awesome. It was in Elmhurst, Queens. And the community was awesome. I mean, I made a ton of money in that neighborhood. But this one young lady, I never forget it, I knocked the door and she had the door cracked and she was kind of looking through the crack. And she said, "Well, the owner of the home is not available." I said, "Okay, thank you. I'm just going to leave my name. I'm going to leave my information on the door." Another thing that's different in New York than other places is our screen doors tend to be like almost fortified, right? So like this was a metal, it's iron worked screen door. Right. There isn't even a screen, honestly. It's really, it's a security door.
Yeah.
It's really what it is. It's a security door. So I'm going to leave my information on the door. Whenever they get home, they can just give me a call. It was late. This is back when most of my meals were eaten at a drive-through window, right? So I went to the main street that was over there and I went to Wendy's. I went, got something to eat. I'm sitting in my car and and we talked about this before we went live, but this is the New Yorker, right? Like I'm always watching everything. So I'm sitting there and I'm relaxing, sitting there, and I see a car come into the parking lot. It's a police car. I see it. I'm not watching it, but I see it in my peripheral, but I don't see it come out the other side in the mirror. So I'm like, that's weird, but whatever, right? Next thing you know, I see someone real close walking up on my car. And then I look over and there's a police officer at my window. So I put the window down and I'm like midway through, I'll be honest, probably midway through my second burger at this point. At this time I was like 350 pounds. So I never ate one burger. Yeah. So I'm midway through my burger and I'm talking to this guy and he goes, "That young lady actually called the cops and said that I was a burglar."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I spent probably an hour, which may not seem long, but I spent an hour trying to verify who I was. I had my little medallion on. They used to give us polo shirts, right, that had that company's name on it. They were red, right? So there was brand. It was for the purpose of brand recognition.
Right.
I had my door tags. I had my ID, which was always I used to always wear it, around my neck so you could see it when I knocked. And I mean, this guy, I had to call my manager. it was a whole big thing. When it was all said and done, to give the officer all his credit, he apologized and he said, you know, you don't ever know what you're walking into. Because I mean, they were very aggressive when they approached the car.
Yeah.
And but I mean, so again, just to answer the question, it's not really necessarily a violence thing, but this young lady, she actually called the cops and then made up the story that I was a burglar.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, they sure did. And then come to find out, because I also spoke to a couple of other people in that community, and their houses were being broken into.
Yeah.
So she didn't just make it up erroneously, but at the same time, I left so that was the other thing too, is the cop had my door tag. And I asked him, I said, well, you've been on the job. He said he'd been on the job like 7 years at that point. And I'm like, well, when was the last time a criminal left their phone number, their name and phone number at the door? Right? Like, when was the last time that happened? I mean, I get it. I know criminals may not be the brightest bulbs on the tree, but I left my name and my phone number.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. Actually, she called me. That's how they knew I was at Wendy's, because she called me and asked me, was I still in the neighborhood? And I said, yes, I'm actually having dinner. I'm up here at Wendy's and I'll be right back over to you. And that's actually how they figured out I was at Wendy's.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
And you know, nowadays with all these cameras and things, because it's in my neighborhood, this is something I see a lot of, is people come up, knock on the door, and then no answer. Then they start trying it, you know, to see if it's open or not, maybe checking a window out. So yeah, I can only imagine, you know, what people might have thought, you know, somebody.
Yeah.
And it could be different too. I am not used to door-to-door people anymore now. So 70s and 80s, we had a lot more of that, you know, the Fuller Brush Man. And then, you know, even in the early 2000s, a guy had this special cleaning sauce that he was coming up knocking door to door too. But they, you know, they physically had something in their hand like they were trying to sell. Whereas, you know, it's like, well, you know, I got a slick. That's about all I've got in my hand.
Right. So two things that reminds me of, not my story, but I was a part of it. When you talk about a different point in door-to-door sales, I remember still being maybe a high school age kid, and this guy comes and he was a vacuum salesman. Yeah. And this gentleman proceeded to vacuum and talk about this vacuum. And again, I was high school age. So like when I think about it now, it's even sillier. And when my mother said no, he proceeded to beg my mother, because he needed one more sale in order to hit whatever goal he needed for the week or whatever it was, right? Like all the spiel that is as old as time. Yeah. Right. And needless to say, my mother didn't purchase the vacuum, and she was actually quite offended that he proceeded to beg her for her money. Because I think the vacuum was, let's say, $1,000 or $2,000.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. And but for you, we'll break it up into 4 easy payments. So you can eat a hamburger today and pay for it tomorrow. Yeah. So the other thing too that you made me think about when you said like you're not used to that door to door. Like I said, in New York City, you don't require any licenses in order to knock. In other parts of the country, and even in upstate New York, you actually have to have certain permissions from local ordinance to be allowed to solicit in the community. Right. Yeah. So, and it's also, you know, I'm sure because of the 80s and even the early 90s, when just like certain things had to change with cell phone companies because of slamming, right? Like, you know, when 15, you'd be paying 20 people for the same phone line because everyone would call, and, you know, we believe MCI at the time and so-and-so at the time, why would they cheat us? So now you're paying for regional, local, and long distance, right? Isn't that the way it used to work?
Gosh, yeah.
So, but you got to think for that same reason, because of something similar to slamming with telephone service in other parts of the country, you have to have, in the door-to-door reps actually have to carry whatever license or permission that is given. Otherwise, if someone does call the police, they don't even say that you're breaking the law. They just let them know that you're soliciting in their community and you're not allowed to. So it is quite interesting when you mention that. That did make me think of that as well.
Yeah, because I think here, you know, most cities have that no solicit. You can get permits to do it, but you know, one thing I talked to, you know, like service companies that have a reason to be in somebody's home in a neighborhood. Usually they're in a truck that's labeled, but you know, that's one thing I do is I don't necessarily say you need to knock because you can get yourself in a little bit of trouble, but at least go to these doors on either side of the house and just leave a card. I mean, it's kind of easy marketing, you know, while you're there to leave something on the door for people. But yeah, it's just interesting because you know, when I first started, when I was a teenager, we had to clean out some barns, and you know, we were hauling this stuff out into the pasture and throwing it. It was a lot of work. And finally, somehow, me and a friend of mine figured out we could package this and sell it. And, you know, instead of just sitting on a corner waiting for people to come by, we did that. We would drive around the neighborhoods. And back in that day, not a lot of the wood privacy fences, more of the chain link. And so we could see in people's backyards, and we would try to find people that either had really nice flower gardens or vegetable gardens. And we'd go up, knock on the door and say, hey, you know, we've got some oat fed, you know, clean fertilizer here that we will sell you. And, you know, we had a really good little hustle there for a couple years. You know, because one thing people just, I think they felt sorry for us, like these kids out hustling fertilizer, we're going to sell it. But, you know, the thing is, we were taking it to their front door. We would haul it back there for them. They weren't having to do anything. But, you know, I guess I just was never, I never gave it a lot of thought. It was just knock on the door. They either want this or they don't. You know, sometimes we had to, the only objections we would have to handle would be, you know, yeah, these horses, they've been out in the pasture eating all kinds of weeds and wild grass, then, you know, they're going to transfer that to our garden. And so we could be like, no, these are barn fed, you know, barn kept, oat fed. They're not out grazing in the pasture. A few objections, but, you know, for the main part, it was like, whatever. They didn't want it. We were off. You know, I didn't have time to sit there and argue with them or feel bad about it. It's like, you know, you don't want it. You know, and there's a good book about that too. It's called Getting to Know, because because sometimes if you just get to somebody's like, no, I don't want it, then you can feel good about moving on. You know, in some services now, you know, you always want to ask why, you know, try to handle those objections. But a lot of times, you know, it's like I can stand here sparring with you for 30 minutes or an hour and you still say no, not because you don't need it, maybe not because you don't want it, maybe you can't even afford it. And that, you know, I think that's the empathy as salespeople we have to have sometimes, is that, you know, we don't know the situation. So
this same manager that I'm going to send this podcast to, specifically, because I don't send him much, but I'm going to send him this for sure. Because he was the trailblazer to my sales career, right? Like he pushed me really hard because he saw that I was a talker, but I didn't know much about sales. But he used to always say, and I don't know if it's a faux pas statement to say now, but he's always said, you can't sell poverty or ignorance, right? Like if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. Right. And if you're unwilling to digest the information that I'm sharing with you, I can't sell it to you either. Right? Those are two objections you just can't overcome. Someone's willing to remain ignorant. There's nothing you can do.
Right.
Something else, the other sales story too about the door-to-door person here in Houston. In fact, I had someone knock on the door. It was like last week. And this guy, it was, left field. I didn't see a truck or anything anywhere. And knock on the door, open the door, and he's got his polo on. It's got the company, his energy company. And he's, the first thing he says is, hey, I was just 3 houses down at so-and-so Rodriguez's house, and they just signed up. I just wanted to let you know, because we're doing some really cool stuff in the neighborhood. And I stopped him and I said, I was just explaining to someone that this is door-to-door sales 101. Whoever trained you is fantastic. Yeah. And I'm enamored of the fact that 10 years later, we're still doing the same spiel, right? Because that was one of the things my manager used to preach upon us. We used to have to carry, he suggested, because have to would imply that I was not following the rules, but he suggested strongly that we would carry old order forms, filled out order forms, and he would fold over the bottom so that you could actually see how thick his stack was. And yeah. This was his game. And what he would do is, and I knocked with him a few times, and what he would do is he would, like while he was talking to you, like let's say he had to get that slick, he would rifle through the old order form. So he could really emphasize the fact that you were not the first one he signed up. Yeah. So the first thing this guy does is tell me about somebody 3 houses down. Yeah. I'm smiling, and I'm like, listen, man, whatever it is, they were selling energy and we're not in the market for it. So you know, I'm like, but thank you.
Yeah.
And it was funny because my response, I guess, was different than most. So he didn't even really know where to go from there.
Yeah.
Because that's literally what I said to him. I was like, man, I literally was just telling someone about you don't want to be the inclusionary opening statement in door-to-door sales. Because it doesn't necessarily work in other spaces, but when it's door-to-door, because like you said, you're in person and you're in a community, if I know Roy's neighbor, I can talk about Roy's neighbor, which makes Roy comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because now I'm not a stranger at the door. I was just at Pam's house, right? Pam trusted me. You're not going to trust me?
Right.
You know, but, and it was never really my thing. I am a traditional New Yorker, so I am skeptical of most things, right? Like,
Right.
I don't believe it's raining until I get wet. So, you know, that was never my way of selling. I was always talking about you, right? Like, and even to this day, I think, and I say this very openly to anyone, right? So I'm thinking about it, it sounds so bad, but most things, it's that same energy used to always say everything's a sale, right? And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that's a little bit too transactional, but all the skills that I've learned in rapport building as a human, I gathered in selling.
Right.
So, you know, just to give the example, I still remember some of the things that were in the background, that were in your background the first time we spoke. Because at some point, I may ask you a question 6 months from now about something that you mentioned in the very first conversation. I'm not selling you anything, but those are the rapport building skills that I learned that just allow for me to be able to have long-standing relationships with a lot of different types of people. Because, you know, when I was at that conference last week, a young lady mentioned on Tuesday that her back was hurting. She said she had arthritis in her back. I saw her on Thursday, and the first question I asked her was, how was her back feeling, right? Not because of anything other than the rapport skills that I built knocking door to door, because I never was the person that was trying to get you to believe that Pam signed up already. And he didn't have an order form or anything. He was reading off of his lead sheet.
Yeah. Well, like, that's one thing we talk about a lot with cold calling, especially, is you have to listen. Number one, seek to understand. That's my new saying. I just love that, because
it's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to listen, because it makes for thoughtful follow-up. And instead of me calling you up and saying, hey, Wendell, this is Roy, we talked last week. Are you ready to buy yet? Oh my gosh. That still just drives me insane. Like, this is 2021. Surely we can do better. It's like,
exactly.
Yeah, I could call, I would follow up and say, hey, I know you were out of town in Miami last week having some fun. How was your trip? You kind of open this conversation up. And then, we just don't always have to go for the jugular. I know people want to cut that time down, but people want to buy from people that they like, and people that they feel like represent themselves, that they're seeing in the mirror. So if we can build a rapport, I still may not close you today, but you're going to remember, hey, kind of friendly with this guy. And so I think that goes such a long way, is just being observant, to take notes. Oh my God, take a note, have a notepad if you're doing it, put it in your CRM. Another thing, that I get all crazy about is people not using CRMs. And this is the exact reason why we should, because I can take notes down, like, okay, Wendell just told me that he took a trip to Miami last week. And so I can get some mileage out of that. And then, just anything else that you pick up in the conversation to circle back around on follow-up.
I'm cringing only because so my biggest hurdle in all sales is the paperwork, right? So we didn't have a CRM at that very first company that I worked for. We didn't have our CRM was a printout of an Excel sheet. That was our CRM.
Right.
And their measurement for success in using it was if you jotted down stuff on it. And what I learned was they didn't look at it anyway. But if you brought back a blank one, especially with no sales, they assumed you never worked it.
Exactly.
So, and I started working at another company. They actually had this app that they built specific for their sales team. That was terrible. I never used it because it took too long in between doors to disposition the sale.
Right.
I used a couple of CRMs in my own business, and the toughest thing for me was always taking the time to write these things down. I have a terrible habit of it. That's why I cringe, because you're right? Like being able to access that information readily is probably the most important piece to it, especially if it's a sales cycle, right? It's no different than remember or writing down someone's birthday. It's not necessarily, it's just essential, right? Like, and our phones do so many different things now, and all the technology that we have linked to our phones, where even if a CRM isn't your favorite thing, most cell phones actually have a note section. So even if you're saving people's phone numbers that you've had a tangible conversation with, you can even write it in there. But I only cringe, not because you're wrong, just because I know how much I don't like doing that part. I was getting so much, every sales job that was not my own, every manager is always like, man, you just refuse to do the paperwork. I'm like, yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah.
Let somebody else do it. I'll tell you everything, but I don't know. I don't want to do it.
Well, and what you have to do is there's a line between, good salespeople or people person, and they want, like yourself, they want to talk and be interactive.
Right.
They don't want to write stuff down, and they don't want to be analytical. That's for somebody else. And then, then there's people like myself that are probably more analytical, but, I try to force myself to do that. Like, just, it's when you're cold calling, especially, you just pop open a screen and be taking some notes, but it's to me, it's so helpful. But yeah, you're not the first. I mean, salespeople, when you bring that up, it's like, oh, the eye roll and head.
Oh, the dread CRM. Another one. I remember when I worked for this other cable company, and forgive me for just jumping off topic again. I love sales. I'm all over the place. Their CRM, they used to use Salesforce. Have you ever used Salesforce?
Yes, it was way too complicated
for me. My goodness. Salesforce, and we used to have an iPad, and this was many generations ago. So this iPad, and you would click the customer, because they didn't give you customer info per se, they would give you address info. So if we went to 123 Main Street, I would know how many people's names this service was in. I could tell you that John Smith 5 years ago ended up accruing a balance of $5,000 in cable service. How, I don't know. But he was able to get to $5,000 in cable service and all this other, just so much data. I remember the first time I actually messed with the CRM in the field, because that was another company. The manager was always mad at me because I would never disposition, because that's how he would track if you were in the field. So I wouldn't disposition until the end of the day. I would just make like little notes on the piece of papers. They would give us paper. So I would just make notes and I would disposition at the end of the day. But they didn't want that because they couldn't tell how long you had technically been in the field. Yeah. So I remember I came to him, I said, one struggle for me is I got to scroll again, because I'm about efficiency when I'm selling. So even with the cold calling, I average. I'm gonna come back to that because I'll tell you the Dallas Theater story real quick. So I remember going to my manager and he couldn't do anything about it because he was lower management, he wasn't even middle management. Yeah. But I'm telling him, like, maybe you can talk to somebody and let them know there's got to be some parameters inside of the master Salesforce suite that lets you guys dumb it down for the people in the field, man. Because I don't want to scroll twice in order to get to where I got to be. I'm trying to hurry up and get to the next door. This disposition is fun for y'all, but I need my sales. Right. And the reality is, it doesn't sound like a lot until you knock 100 doors, right? So if we're doing 100 doors and each door takes a minute, that's 100 minutes of my day that I don't get back. Right. That's how many doors did I miss? Yeah. Right. Like those are the things that, and again, that's my way of being lazy on the other side, right? So I make it all about the sales, right? So that the manager hopefully understands, but needless to say, they were a huge company using Salesforce at an enterprise level, and they were not in a hurry to switch anything out on that. Yeah, and that's what I tell people. There's so many out there. I don't mind saying I went through like 5 or 6 before I found one that was, simplistic enough for me to use, but yet I guess complicated enough. It captured all the information I needed it to, and that, and that is a definite issue about, we have to make it easy on sales, especially people out in the field that, if we're expecting people to keep moving, but yet then I'm asking you to pull over and take 10 minutes to, fill something out. We just have to try to make it as easy as possible. One thing else I was going to ask you about is packages. You mentioned on your Slick, you had 3 packages. Yeah. So
did they design that for your sweet spot? Was that middle package? You know, you had the low one that probably had like 4 stations on it that cost an arm and a leg, and then that top one was like, you know, $1,200 a month, and that middle one there is like, you know, 250 channels for $80 a month.
So 2 things. I have been chasing the perfect package names ever since their packages, right? Because they had good, better, best. You can't get better. I've never seen better descriptions, right? Because you got the good, the better, and the best. That's just no other way to describe it.
Yeah.
And then to answer your question, no, actually. So because, and I've already said it because I was trying not to be brand specific, but because I was selling Verizon Fios, the price point that they entered into New York with was $69.99 at the time. So they were dirt cheap in comparison to, at the time, Time Warner.
Yeah.
So Time Warner cable, I mean, a single box Time Warner account at that time was going to run you at least $120 a month. Wow. So at $70, no boxes, we're already ahead of the curve. Now, what we would do is, because, and it was actually kind of inverted. So what bad managers would tell us was to tell them it was $69.99, not assess the need of the customer. So the bad ones would tell us to start there and then just build your boxes. But what would happen is you may get to a certain turning point because it was $69.99 and $129. So you would get to a certain turning point where if they got the ultimate, which included all the channels, all the premium channels, and NFL Red Zone, plus the 3 boxes for the same basic service they had with Time Warner, they would still sometimes either balance out or be cheaper.
Yeah.
Time Warner at that time was very expensive.
Wow.
So, and really, and this is something I always find interesting, because, you know, like, monopolies in this country are very subjective. Like, telecom is a monopoly, but it's a subjective monopoly because of the way that things were written many, many moons ago. Right. So, like, you know, the way that the country is broken up according to telecom companies, you know, very rarely are you seeing 2 different coaxial companies in the same market, right? So part of that allows for that one coaxial company to charge you how they feel, you know? You really don't have an option. So when Fios started emerging into New York, it was almost a breath of fresh air because it was only Time Warner or satellite. Whereas it was fiber, coaxial-ish, right? Because you still had coax in the home, but it allowed for us to be able to break that mold. So for us, it was a little different. And that middle package was actually the crappiest because it put you in no man's land. Like, it was like, the basic was for people who really didn't care too much about TV, but the internet was leagues faster than Time Warner. Whereas the ultimate was the TV junkie, and it had the fastest internet, right? But the middle was like this odd, like, that was actually the one that was more like
interesting.
Yeah, like you would get like USA and 4 family channels, but not ESPN. You know, like it was odd. Like it was an odd mishmash of channels, and it had medium speed. And especially at that price point, because of how much people were accustomed to paying for cable, most people were just willing to pay to get everything for the prices they were paying for nothing.
Right.
I had a lot of people who upgraded to all the channels just because their 3 boxes with DVR or whatever it was at the time, you know, was a $300 bill. Whereas all in, most people who got ultimates who had, you know, a 2 or 3 bedroom home, you know, plus living room, they were somewhere topping out somewhere around $230.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And that's kind of a hot button for me. I spent a lot of time, you know, about 20 years with AT&T on the phone side.
Yes.
I was actually pre-internet was coming out, but it was still dial-up. I hate to say that back in that day, but yes. You know, and we've been having an issue with our service. I'm not going to get all into slamming anybody, but what I would say is that, you know, with I think it's a telecom bill in 96, we deregulated and said, okay, anybody's service can ride over anybody else's cable, which it's awesome. But if it's my cable and I'm selling Wendell's service over my cable. How motivated am I to go out and fix my cable where they can get your service?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, and again, like you said, not to fall totally off the sales cliff, but something else that's interesting about a lot of industries is they give you that deregulation of the industry, but at the same time, something called rent seeking, which is almost lobbying legislation to make it to where even though it's an open market, the barrier for entry is very difficult.
Yeah.
Right. So like in recent years, we've seen more cell phone companies emerge, right? Like now we've got several options, whereas like you said, once upon a time, it was a big three, or really it was only two. Well, no, there was three. Because you had Sprint, AT&T, and Verizon. Those are your big three. Those are the only options you had. And there's been a few, right? Because you remember Singular was they, and then AT&T took them, right? But the point, and again, not going too far off, is you're absolutely right, is having a third party on their lines, it still gives the same leverage of, well, I don't know who's going to fix it because that's not my service.
Yeah. And what we did in Texas, I think, is an awesome thing that, I've kind of been lobbying for on the phone side, is that when we deregulated power, we created a company that took care of the lines. They take care of all the lines everywhere.
Right.
Now you can go buy your power from whatever generator that you want to.
And we could do a whole other episode on energy companies in Texas and how confusing it is for non-Texan. But that's another story for another time.
So and I hate to get off track, but I just feel like, if we could ever get to that point where we could have this company that took care of the backbone infrastructure, and then you can buy your service from whoever. Anyways, we'll begin.
It's a great point. So to get us back on topic, the Dallas Theater Center, which is what I was telling you about before we went live,
right?
And that was a whole other nuance, right? Because I had B2B sales experience at that point, B2B cold calling sales experience. So just to kind of track it, I do door to door for Verizon. I actually ended up going over to Time Warner because the people who had the contract at Verizon, whatever reason, the leads started getting crazy. Like they were only giving us a third of the information. It was bad. So Time Warner, I ended up contracting with Time Warner. And between that time, I sold merchant processing, like the terminals where you swipe the cards.
Right.
Yeah, I sold that for some time. I sold all kinds of things, but that was a B2B thing. And within that was working capital, right? And again, like you said, not to slam, but it's basically like a payday loan for businesses. I don't know if you're familiar with those kind of loans. So what it is one, the rate is like anywhere between 30 and 50%, right? So we're already talking legal loan sharking, right?
Right. Wow.
Yeah, legal loan sharking, right? Because in most states, a personal loan, 29.99 is usually the max out. Yeah. In most states, right? Very rarely they let you go higher than that when it comes to a loan. But for a B2B loan, they usually call it working capital. But this is what this company did. And they may have changed the regulations on how high you can go on the interest, but the payback would be 30 to 50% on most good loans.
Wow.
And it would be based on your credit card transactions. So I sold that. I only sold that portion towards the end of my tenure in that industry. And that's when I learned that it was rough because there's a certain niche industry that needs it more often than not. It's actually restaurants.
Yeah.
It tends to be in the food industry because the way that they operate is so lean. And it's actually not only lean, but they need a lot of capital, right? They need a lot of cash on hand to be able to function with their vendors. So all those things allowed for working capital spaces to be very interesting. Also learned about batching out, right? Like, I don't know if you do any credit card processing, but like batching out. And once upon a time, I don't know how long you've been doing it, was really my statement. Once upon a time, you'd have to wait 48 hours in order to get your batch out. Whereas now there really isn't a company that won't give it to you tomorrow or anything for that matter for an additional 1%. But we'll start for another time. So I do that. And then I get really deep into B2B selling only websites for some time. Things slow down and I get a job. All right, this is a regular wage job plus commission, which was what Time Warner was, but the salary at that time was $40K. So it really wasn't that bad, right? Like, but this one was in this city, minimum wage, whatever it was. Well, let's say I was making $7 an hour, right?
Yeah.
So it was a completely different pay scale. So my money really needs to be made on commission. Speaking to the amount of calls you can make in a day. So my first day, I've never done business to customer, business to consumer, right? And not cold calling anyway. So I'm trying to muddle through this. They've got probably about this much of script, right? Like this is how much script they expect us to learn.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find the answer because this company has been around since the 80s. So they know all the rebuttals, right? So and you're supposed to flip to this section. And then when they say this, you can go back up to that, right? And I was so stressed the first couple of days.
Yeah.
So I go talk to the manager and I'm like, listen, this isn't going to work, right? Like I'm a conversationalist. So let me learn what the objections are and I can walk through them, but I can't go, okay, Roy, why don't you want tickets today?
Right.
He said, oh, it's up here. Okay. Everyone feels this way, but let me tell you the packages, right? Like that's not, so it's painful. I mean, that was, and it was a great script for someone because they had all the rebuttals. I've never seen such a robust rebuttal space. But again, I got some experience. So my very first week there, my manager pulls me to the side and she goes, how are you making so many calls? Because they couldn't track the length of the calls, but they could see how many calls you made. Right. It wasn't until the week after that the range of the time of the calls. So what I told her was, what I learned when I used to do B2B for myself, when I was selling the websites, was after 3 rings, people usually aren't answering anyway, so just hang up and call the next person, right? Like, there's no point to wait until the voicemail comes on. You're not gonna leave one. It doesn't make sense. So just 3 rings, move on. 3 rings, move on. And she goes, I've never thought to do that. And this woman, she had a couple of years of sales experience in this specific space. And she goes, I've never thought to do that. And I again, go back to that with the efficiency, right? Like I was dialing almost twice as fast as most of my peers in that office because everyone waited until the voicemail.
Right.
And again, for me, all the other things are, even with that script, I eventually got them to let me leave the script alone because it was painful for me. But all the other things, it's always about just the efficiency in the sale, right? Like if you want sales, especially if you see someone who has personality, I think I have personality, especially when you see some people who have personality, let them be themselves because if the answer is the sale, everything else will come together. Yeah. The other part to that sale, which was hilarious because I didn't get to explain to them all the things I did prior. They used to know I had sales experience. The young lady explained to me that the toughest part of the sale will be when you ask for the credit card information. And I said to her, I said, well, this is during training. I said, well, I'm just going to tell you, I used to get date of births and socials at the door. So these are people who more often than not bought tickets from this company previously. And right. We just needed to make sure that we had to process it with new credit card information. Yeah. And that's easy. They already know that this is happening. I was going to strangers' doors randomly on a Saturday, letting Roy know that today is the day you're going to give a stranger your social security number. That's what's happening today.
Oh my God, that's crazy. So I know it's a little different with the door-to-door and making cold calls, but what's your opinion on selling B2C versus B2B? There's a lot of variables, and I know the calling versus in person, even makes it a little bit more different, but which do you like to do better?
I'm trying to think. So let me just caveat this with, I may have lied. I did door-to-door for a political company, for the Working Families Party. I don't know if they're a political group. It's a small independent group. And I didn't have their beliefs, but they were paying. Yeah. So at this time I was like 18, 19 years old, maybe even 17. And I did knock doors for them briefly. And that was before my career started. So technically that was the first. And I didn't look at it as sales because we just needed to get them to sign a petition. Yeah. So I guess that may have been B2C-ish, right? But to answer your question, my personal thought is I really enjoy B2B, and I am biased because it's my bread and butter now. But I enjoy B2B only because I feel like, and I've never sold anything that had a long-term shelf life on the consumer side. But because of what I do now, I enjoy it because of the rapport I build. Yeah. Right? Like most of my clients I've had for years, like I was explaining to you before, the one young lady that I helped her with her conference down, and I worked for her at her conference down in Miami this past week. I've known her for 10 years. I mean, that's kind of like, you know, most of my clients, of course I get new ones, but once they're in, I know them for years, right? Like I can't remember the last like true client that I've had and that wasn't expected to be a one-off job. I didn't know for at least 2 or 3 years. So for me, the B2B, it works. I enjoy it more because I end up building long-standing relationships with these people. Yeah. So like, and again, but I am skewed, right? Because that is where my bread and butter is now. But I've also never sold anything to consumers that had a long shelf life, right? Like maybe if I was a sales, if I was a car salesman, I may have long-standing relationships, you know. But again, like we talk about, all salespeople aren't created equal. Because when I say that, I think, you know, if I sold a convertible or a coupe to someone, you know, especially in their younger years, and I'm staying in the industry, I'm always talking to you because at some point you may grow into a family. And I'm hoping if I sold you a coupe, I'm hoping to sell you the minivan at some point.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, but again, everybody doesn't necessarily think like that. So that would be my only answer to that.
Yeah, and you know, kind of on that line of thinking too, is that all of your friends usually drive cars too. So it's well worth keeping up for a lot of things, a lot of reasons.
Exactly.
Well, Wendell, I appreciate it. I know we've gone way over, but
I didn't even know. I don't have any time in front of me. Again, we could talk about sales until I'm blue in the face. The only two things, and forgive me for cutting off your exit, but the only two things that I love talking about when it comes to just random things in the world is basketball and sales. Those are two things I could talk until I'm blue in the face. I don't even look at the time. I look up and the sun's down, man. I'm telling you.
Well, it's been interesting, and that's why I said that's why I had to get you on, because it's a unique experience that I think you know, sometimes we think that when we walk into an employer and they ask us to pick up a phone, we think, oh, how tough is that? And you know, it's like, no, that's nothing having to you know, be door to door in any environment, but door to door in New York City adds just a little bit of flavor to that. So I appreciate you coming back on and talking with us about that. And so, yeah, and like I said, be sure there's another episode where we talk more about local SEO. Catch Wendell on that one too. But tell everybody, before we get out of here, tell everybody, of course, how can they reach, you know, who do you like to work with? What can you do for them? How can they reach out and get a hold of you?
Yes, sir. So the best way to reach me is my email, and I'll, you know, continue with my silliness. My email is too long, right? So that's why I tell people LinkedIn, because it's my first name has 11 letters, and then Jordan Marketing Consultants is forever. So it's Wendell at jordanmarketingconsultants.com. That's a mouthful. So if you just find me on LinkedIn, that's always a great way to reach me. As you mentioned in the beginning, my ideal client is a local business, right? Someone that has a local service area who is looking to grow in a local or regional space, right? So someone that, you know, understands what local SEO, or would like to understand better what local SEO looks like, and even what SEO looks like. But a lot of my favorites are those local businesses. To go back to the other episodes, and now people have to watch and listen. The pizza shops, right? Like,
yes, exactly. Yeah, I was hungry after we got through with that episode, using the pizza shops as an example. But it's important. I think it's important for, you know, our bricks and mortars. We got to compete against, you know, virtual in some instances, but we also need new and efficient ways. I mean, the days of the newspapers pretty much gone. I don't know many people that really take one. We see some online, but you know, the old traditional channels of marketing, a brick and mortar, have changed. So we got to learn to put this local SEO to work for us. So, all right. Well, thanks again. I certainly do appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet. Of course, you can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're on all the major podcast platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you listen to, please reach out. Be glad to get it added to make it easier for you to listen to us. Also on major social media, probably Instagram is the most used. Reach out there. We'd love to interact with you. And a video of this will go up when the episode goes live. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.